worked here full-time, and I was a full-time mother. You want to talk management?
George, that's beautiful.
I wish we didn't have to say goodbye.
Do you remember the TV moms who vanished mysteriously without saying goodbye? These mothers were part of our living rooms, guiding kids, settling chaos, and anchoring shows we watched with our own families. But when they disappeared without a word, why did no one seem to notice? Sandy Hogan was the heart of the Hogan family when it first aired, and you would never have guessed she would vanish like a ghost in the night. The show was even originally called Valerie, named after the mom herself, played by actress Valerie Harper. Sandy was not just a character. She was the glue. She was the kind of mother who could juggle everything without breaking a sweat, even with 3 boys, a household in chaos, and a husband who was never around. But if you blinked, you missed her goodbye, because there never was one. Valerie Harper had a contract dispute with the producers, and the disagreement got so heated that the writers simply wrote her off the show. Not with a dramatic farewell, not with a tearful last scene, just gone. Replaced by the ever-reliable Sandy Duncan, who stepped in as the boys' aunt. And the show was renamed The Hogan Family. That was it. A new woman, a new title, and no looking back. No funeral, no flashback. Not even a passing reference from the kids she raised. The show never paused to explain what happened or how anyone felt about it. It just hit reset like the past never happened. Like she never mattered. And that silence was louder than any scripted goodbye could have been. For anyone who watched in real time, it felt like a gut punch. Valerie was not just a TV mom. She was their mom. The show had just started gaining traction. Families across the country were tuning in weekly to see a mother holding it together with wit, warmth, and strength. Then suddenly, she was missing, and nobody in the show seemed to care. The boys moved on, the story moved on, and the viewers were left staring at the screen wondering if they had imagined her in the first place. Off-screen drama often shapes what we see on camera, but this one stung more than most. It was not just a recasting. It was a mother erased. Not written off with dignity, not sent away with a proper exit, but quietly deleted from her own show. And it was not just a television decision, it was a reflection of how easily someone could be replaced when things got difficult. The audience never got closure. Neither did her sons on screen, or the millions of viewers who had started to believe in her. One day she was there. Next, she was not. And nobody ever said goodbye. Rachel Crawford was more than a side character in Family Matters. She was one of the few single mothers on primetime television in the early 1990s, raising her son Richie while living with the Winslows. And yet, for a woman who brought so much humor, strength, and stability to the show, her exit was quieter than a whisper. She did not get a goodbye episode. She did not get a send-off. One day, she was just not there anymore. No explanation, no acknowledgement, no nothing. You almost had to ask yourself if she had ever been there at all. Rachel was played by Thelma Hopkins, a seasoned performer with real screen presence. Her character was a working woman, a mother, and a sister, not some background filler. She brought depth to a show that by then was becoming more and more about Steve Urkel and his inventions. But when the tone shifted from family sitcom to madcap science fiction, Rachel disappeared like she had never been part of the Winslow house. There was no moment where she hugged Richie goodbye or talked about moving on. No final dinner scene, no framed photo left behind, no mention in passing. It was like the Winslow home simply absorbed her absence without a trace. And in a show so rooted in family, that silence felt especially cold. And it is not just the fans who noticed. In a show that celebrated family, love, and loyalty, Rachel's exit felt like a betrayal of the very values it stood for. The house she lived in was still there. Her son, Richie, stayed on. Her sister Harriet kept hosting family dinners in the same living room. And somehow, nobody mentioned Rachel again. You would think that at least a line or two, something, anything, would have been said about where she went. But no. It was like a shadow passed through and then it was gone. Behind the scenes, there were contract issues. Thelma Hopkins was pursuing other work. Fair enough, that happens. But what gets people all these years later is how cleanly she was cut out of the emotional fabric of the show. Viewers spent years growing attached to her, watching her overcome hardship, cheering her on as she started her own business, even tearing up when she faced motherhood on her own. And then, just nothing. It felt less like a story ending and more like someone ripped a photo out of the family album and never looked back. That kind of erasure does not just fade, it sticks with you. Because Rachel did not deserve to go out like that. None of them did. Carol Traynor was not just Maude's daughter. She was the counterweight. In a show like Maude, where the matriarch was loud, brash, and boldly political, Carol was measured, intelligent, and emotionally sharp. Played by Adrienne Barbeau, she brought a kind of grounded grace to the series that stood out in a time of bold statements and big laughs. She was not just a daughter, she was a mother too, raising little Philip on her own. For years, Carol helped give Maude balance. Their arguments, their reconciliations, the way they both parented and judged each other, it was some of the best writing on television. But then, just like that, Carol faded from the screen. No big plot twist, no final scene. She was just gone, and Maude never looked back. It is strange because Carol was essential. Not only was she a mother, but she was also one of the few young single mothers portrayed on television at the time. She was smart, she was independent, and she challenged Maude in ways that felt real. Their dynamic was not just entertainment, it was family drama done right. So for her to disappear without a farewell, it still does not sit right with longtime fans. The show went on to tackle issue after issue, but the fact that they did not even acknowledge Carol's departure feels like a strange blind spot in a series that was usually all about confronting things head-on. There are a few theories. Maybe Barbeau was pursuing other projects, maybe the writers felt the show had shifted, but it is not about what happened behind the curtain. It is about what it felt like to the viewers who had watched these two women battle and bond over seasons. Carol deserved a goodbye. Philip deserved a goodbye. The audience deserved a goodbye. But all we got was silence. It is the kind of exit that makes you question everything you thought the show stood for. And maybe that is the most unsettling part. When something you thought was solid just quietly slips away. No tears, no closure. Just the sound of a door that never closed. Joanna Drummond entered Different Strokes as a kind of hopeful turning point. The moment when Mr. Drummond, the ultra-wealthy, big-hearted adoptive father, finally found love again. Played by Dixie Carter, Joanna was elegant, poised, and thoughtful. She was not just a stepmother. She was a symbol of stability, someone who could help raise Arnold and Willis while making the Drummond home feel whole. Her wedding to Mr. Drummond was a big deal. It was a TV event, complete with celebration and optimism. And then, not long after, she just vanished. No long goodbye, no heartfelt scene, no explanation. She simply stopped appearing. For a character who was introduced with so much fanfare, it was jarring, like skipping ahead in a book and finding out a main character has been erased from the story. In a show where the family dynamic was everything, her disappearance was not just confusing, it was emotionally off-key. Joanna was part of the promise the show made to viewers, that even in a house full of change, there could still be love and direction. When she was gone, the show never even flinched. It just moved forward, as if the family had always been that way. And that left a weird hole, not just in the living room set, but in the entire emotional rhythm of the series. Behind the scenes, it was just another example of casting shifts and production changes. Dixie Carter left, and the show decided not to address it. But what they forgot was that viewers were invested. They cared. They watched Joanna marry into a complicated household, and they rooted for her. She brought a gentleness that balanced out the chaos, a softness that made the mansion feel like a home. Without her, it felt like something important was missing. And worse, no one seemed to notice. Joanna Drummond was not the main star, but she mattered, especially to kids watching at home who might have had their own versions of new moms or stepmothers, hoping to see that kind of love reflected on screen. So when she disappeared without a word, it sent a message that maybe those stories were not worth finishing. That is what made her exit so quietly painful. She deserved a goodbye. We all did. Jessica Tate from Soap was not your typical TV mom. She was wealthy, aloof, often hilariously confused, and still one of the most lovable characters to grace television in the late 1970s. Played by Katherine Helmond, she brought a gentle absurdity to a show built entirely on chaos. Affairs, aliens, murder, possession. Soap had it all. But even amid the mayhem, Jessica was always the heart of it. A mother to grown, dysfunctional children, and the emotional centerpiece of a satire that constantly pushed boundaries. So when she died off-screen between seasons, without so much as a last moment on camera, it hit fans like a thunderclap. No final words, no last laugh, just gone. Jessica's death was mentioned briefly in narration, almost like a postscript, and for a character so central that felt unfair. She was not just part of the show. She was the show, the one who kept things balanced in a universe full of spiraling drama. Her exit was not just sad, it was wrong. This was a woman who had survived everything from political scandal to supernatural possession. To have her story end off-screen with a quiet explanation was like erasing an entire piece of what made Soap work. To be fair, the show itself was already on shaky ground. It had pushed too many boundaries for the time. Ratings dropped, censorship loomed, and eventually, the plug was pulled. But Jessica's disappearance still hurts, because even when the plot made no sense, she did. Her love for her kids, her delicate humor, her unshakable charm. She made the madness feel grounded. She gave the audience someone to hold on to. And then she was taken away like it meant nothing. Maybe they thought we would forget, that in a show full of twists, one more death would not matter. But they underestimated how much people cared. How much they saw Jessica as a mother, not just to her kids, but to the whole wild, wacky family that Soap built. When she vanished without a goodbye, the laughter faded just a little sooner. Because sometimes even in comedy, you need closure. And Jessica never got hers. Harriet Winslow was a rock. From Perfect Strangers to Family Matters, she was the voice of reason in a house that somehow managed to attract both chaos and Carl. She was the mom every kid wanted, firm but fair, strong but loving, and never afraid to lay down the law when Steve Urkel walked through the door uninvited. But near the end of the show's 9-season run, something strange happened. Jo Marie Payton, the original Harriet, left, and the role was recast with Judy Ann Elder. On paper, sure, the mom was still there. But in practice, she had disappeared. That warmth, that spark, that Harrietness, gone. And the show barely acknowledged the change. It was a bizarre move, especially for a show so deeply rooted in family values. You had watched Harriet for years. She had carried this family through everything. She worked hard. She protected her kids. She was the emotional anchor through the wild antics of Steve and the quiet heartbreak of Judy Winslow's earlier disappearance. And yet now, she herself had been replaced. And it felt like no one knew what to say. The producers said Jo Marie Payton was ready to move on. After years of carrying the emotional weight of the series, she had had enough. But the real sting came from how the change was handled. No farewell episode, no transition, just a new face in the same kitchen, saying the same lines, and pretending nothing had changed. But viewers did notice. Because Harriet Winslow was not just any TV mom. She was the TV mom. And when her character was recast with no build-up, it broke the illusion. It made fans feel like the show had stopped caring, or worse, that we had all been taking her for granted. The love she brought to that role, irreplaceable. And yet, they tried to do just that, swapping out a mother figure like she was just another piece of the set. It was not just jarring, it was disrespectful. So even though someone else was standing there, flipping pancakes and offering advice, it never felt the same again. Because Harriet Winslow never got to say goodbye. And deep down, we all knew it. Louise Jefferson was never supposed to vanish. From All in the Family to the Jeffersons, she was a fixture, a proud, steady, no-nonsense woman who grounded George's wild ambition with calm authority. Isabel Sanford made Louise unforgettable. She was the mother, the neighbor, the voice of reason. She rolled her eyes at George's antics, but never stopped loving him. She was the warmth in the sharp-witted world of sitcom politics, race, and class. And then, with barely a word, Louise disappeared. Not just once, but twice. The first time was with the ill-fated spin-off checking in. The show followed Louise's housekeeper Florence as she moved on to a new job. Louise was part of the send-off, a kind of quiet goodbye that felt incomplete but forgivable. It made sense for a minute. But when checking in failed and Florence returned to the Jeffersons, Louise did not come back right away. And when she did reappear later, the continuity was never fully explained. It was as if nothing had happened, as if Louise could step back into her role like slipping into a pair of old shoes. Then came the real vanishing act. Toward the end of the Jeffersons, Louise faded from view. Her appearances grew fewer. Her lines got shorter. And in the final episodes, she was just gone. No final moment with George. No family scene. No goodbye. Even the series finale, which was already a mess thanks to sudden cancellation, left her out. And fans were left wondering, again, how a character so central could be dismissed with such silence. Behind the scenes, it came down to disputes, contracts, and shifting priorities. But what the audience saw was something else. A mother erased, twice over. Louise had been part of history. She represented a new kind of black matriarch on television, assertive, independent, deeply loving. And yet, her story was never given a proper ending. Maybe they thought the audience would not notice. But they did. They always do. Because Louise Jefferson was never just a TV character. She was proof that a woman could move on up and still stay grounded. That a family could thrive, not just survive. So when she disappeared without goodbye, it was not just a plot hole. It was a loss. One that still stings. When A Different World launched, it had every reason to succeed. A fresh setting, a younger cast, and a connection to one of the most iconic TV families of all time, the Huxtables. In the early episodes, you could even spot familiar faces from The Cosby Show making appearances to bridge the gap. Denise Huxtable, played by Lisa Bonet, was the main star. But more importantly, her mother, Claire Huxtable, played flawlessly by Felicia Rashad, also showed up. The idea was clear. This was a continuation, not a break. We were still with the Huxtables, just watching the next chapter. But that chapter was abruptly torn out of the book. After just one season, both Denise and her mother were gone. The show retooled its focus, shifting from a quirky college comedy to a sharper, more grounded story about life at a historically black university. And while that transition helped the show in the long run, it came at the cost of continuity. Claire Huxtable, the iconic, brilliant, take-no-nonsense mother, disappeared without a single moment of closure. No on-campus visit, no emotional phone call, nothing. And for viewers who followed the Huxtables like family, it felt like a betrayal. Claire was the kind of mother people aspired to be. Professional, graceful, and deeply loving. She was not just part of The Cosby Show. She was its spine. So seeing her introduced in the spin-off, then pulled away with no explanation, was like getting halfway through a story, only to find the pages missing. Of course, the reasons behind the scenes were complex. Creative differences, ratings, a rebranding of tone, but those are not things the average viewer saw. All they knew was that the mother they loved, the one who had guided Denise with sharp wit and sharper wisdom, was gone. As if her presence no longer mattered. Maybe the writers assumed the audience would not ask. Maybe they thought no one would notice. But when someone like Claire Huxtable disappears without saying goodbye, people remember. Because she was more than just a character in a living room. She was the kind of mom who made that room feel real, and she should have never left it in silence. Marion Cunningham was the all-American mom, warm, smiling, always with a plate of cookies or a glass of milk. She was television's poster child for 1950s motherhood, and on happy days, she embodied comfort, patience, and emotional wisdom. Played by Marion Ross, she helped raise not just Richie Cunningham, but a whole generation of viewers who tuned in for that cozy family feel. But behind that perfect suburban image, something quietly unsettling happened. Her oldest son, Chuck Cunningham, vanished from the show early on. And while the spotlight always focused on Chuck, people forget that Marion, his mother, never once acknowledged his absence. Not once. In the early episodes, Chuck was there, a college-aged basketball player, a bit aloof, a bit distant, but still a part of the family. He walked into scenes with his duffel bag, joked with Richie, and nodded at his mom. And then, he walked up the stairs and never came back. Literally. The show never explained it. No accident, no transfer, not even a throwaway line. Just gone. And the worst part? Marion never asked where he went. The show later pretended he never existed. When characters referred to Richie as an only child, it was not played for laughs. It was canon. And that silence from Marion Cunningham, the ultimate TV mom, was the part that hurt the most. How could a mother who worried over homework and hairstyles forget her own son? Some say it was just the era. Writers back then did not worry about continuity the way we do now. Some say Chuck was not a popular character and got the axe. All true, but the emotional hole remains. Not because of Chuck himself, but because of what his disappearance says about Marion. She was too good of a mom to forget, too present, too caring, too kind to just let a child fade from memory. Maybe that is what makes it feel so strange. The mom who remembered everyone's birthdays, who hugged Fonzie like her own, somehow forgot her firstborn. That was not just lazy writing, it was unsettling. And even after all the laughs, all the nostalgia, that missing goodbye still lingers. A mother without a memory, a son who vanished, and a family photo with one person quietly erased. Betty Jo Bradley was not just a daughter, she became a mother, right there on screen in Petticoat Junction. The youngest of the Bradley sisters, she grew from a wide-eyed tomboy to a strong, nurturing woman raising her own child at the Shady Rest Hotel. Played by Linda Kay Henning, Betty Jo was one of the most endearing characters on the show, soft-spoken but determined, sweet but sharp when needed. She had her baby, Kathy Jo, in one of the show's most tender arcs. And for a while, audiences got to see what life looked like for a young mom trying to balance family, marriage, and a baby, all with small-town charm. But then something strange happened. Quietly, without any fanfare, Betty Jo faded into the background. One day she was helping run the family hotel, raising her child, and holding her marriage together. And the next, she was just not there. There was no final moment, no mother-daughter goodbye, no touching family send-off. For a character who had grown so much in front of our eyes, her absence was nothing short of eerie. Part of the blame goes to the later seasons of Petticoat Junction, which were already struggling after the death of lead actress Bea Benaderet. The tone shifted, the writing changed, and suddenly, the focus on the family, especially the mothers, all but disappeared. Betty Jo, who had once represented the new generation of young women and mothers on screen, got no conclusion. Her story just stopped. The hotel still buzzed with activity, but her room might as well have been empty. For fans who had followed her journey, who watched her fall in love, get married, and become a mother, it felt like a betrayal. Not just of the character, but of the entire arc. She was the next step in the family line, the future of the Shady Rest, the mother who represented hope. And to erase her without even a mention was like tearing the last pages out of a book. Betty Jo Bradley deserved better. She was a symbol of transition, of new beginnings in a show rooted in old-fashioned values. And when she vanished without a goodbye, it was more than a plot hole. It was a heartbreak. Nancy Lawrence Maitellan from Family was complicated. She was not the kind of mother who offered soft hugs or homemade cookies. Nancy was fierce, focused, and sometimes emotionally distant. but that made her one of the most realistic mothers on television in the late 1970s. Played by Meredith Baxter Birney, she navigated life as a divorced young mother with raw honesty. Her relationship with her son, Timmy, was tense at times, but it was never hollow. Nancy was figuring it out as she went, balancing career, motherhood, and the heavy expectations of a family that rarely let anyone breathe. And that is what made her so powerful. She was not perfect. She was trying. And we were watching her grow up as a woman and a mother at the same time. Her choices were messy. Her temper flared. But her love was real. It was hard-earned, and it mattered. That is what made it so jarring when she slowly disappeared from the show. There was no dramatic exit, no big moment of change, just fewer lines, fewer scenes, and eventually no Nancy at all. Family was a series that prided itself on emotional depth. It took its time. It showed characters evolving through trauma, relationships, and inner conflict. So for someone like Nancy, a mother with so much unresolved tension, to be written out without resolution felt hollow. The show kept going, the family kept moving forward, but something was missing. That edge, that friction, that realness. Nancy brought all of it, and once she was gone, things got quieter and less true. Behind the scenes, Meredith Baxter was in demand. Other projects called, but on screen, none of that was addressed. Her son remained. Her past remained. But Nancy was erased, and viewers were left with questions that never got answered. She was one of the few mothers on television at the time who felt like someone you might actually know. Someone who said the wrong thing, made mistakes, but kept showing up. Her disappearance did not just change the tone of the show. It left a silence that never quite got filled. Nancy deserved a goodbye. A real one. Not just for her character, but for the story she carried. Catherine Romano was never meant to be the center of attention in one day at a time. She was not part of the core family. But for a while, she represented something important, a different kind of mother-in-law. She was Julie's husband's mom, and in the middle seasons, she appeared as a recurring character who brought tension, tradition, and a whole lot of passive-aggressive energy to the show. Catherine was old school, formal, and not always easy to like, but she was real. And for Julie, who was learning how to navigate marriage and motherhood, Catherine was a constant reminder of the pressures that came with both. She challenged Julie's decisions, but not in a cruel way, just in the way real in-laws sometimes do. She hovered at the edges of family dinners, offering critiques that sounded like compliments. And yet, there were flickers of warmth, moments where you could tell she wanted to connect, even if she did not know how. It made her complicated, and that made her human. In a sitcom world full of easy laughs, Catherine felt like someone you might actually know. She was the kind of mother-in-law who would correct your table manners, question your parenting, and still somehow make you feel like she was doing you a favor. But that was the point. Catherine added friction, the kind that real families have, and she helped flesh out Julie's world beyond her own mother, Anne. For a show that prided itself on being honest and raw, Catherine offered a look at the generational clash between women who did not always see eye to eye. And then she was gone. Not with a bang, not with a dramatic departure, but with total silence. One season she was there, attending dinners, making judgments, adding complexity. The next, vanished. There was no reason given, no closure offered, just an empty chair at the table and a piece of the emotional puzzle missing. It is easy to overlook someone like Catherine. She was not a lead. She was not always kind. But that is exactly what made her important. She was part of the tension that made the show feel lived in. Not everyone gets along. Not every mother figure is nurturing. And not every family member sticks around. But they all leave a mark. Catherine left one. And the decision to wipe it clean without acknowledgement felt out of sync with a show that was usually so good at honesty. Maybe the writers thought we would not miss her. But the truth is, in a show that dealt with growing up, getting married, and falling apart, her presence mattered. And her absence was loud. Catherine Romano may not have said goodbye, but the show should have said something. Kate Summers Stratton was not just the business-savvy executive who married Edward. She was a stabilizing force in Silver Spoons. Introduced midway through the show, she brought a touch of maturity to a world that often felt like one big toy store. Kate was level-headed, caring, and smart, always finding a way to support both Edward and Ricky through the growing pains of their unusual family dynamic. She was not flashy. She was not trying to replace anyone, but she anchored the chaos, and she did it with grace. She helped Ricky navigate adolescence with a kind of quiet steadiness that grounded the show. She never stole scenes. She held them together. When Edward spiraled into another over-the-top idea, Kate brought the common sense. She gave the show its adult voice without ever losing its fun. And more than anything, she felt like someone who truly loved this strange new family she had married into. So when she suddenly stopped appearing near the end of the show's run, fans were left blinking. There was no emotional send-off, no explanation woven into the plot. One season she was there, helping raise Ricky. The next, she was simply gone. Not a word about where she went or why she left. It was as if the writers expected us to forget that she had ever been there at all. But Kate was more than a side character. She was a second mother to Ricky, a supportive partner to Edward, and a key part of what made that house feel like a home. Her absence left a cold spot, a silence that did not match the warm, funny, heartfelt world the show had built. And like too many mothers on television, she vanished without saying goodbye. For a brief moment, Growing Pains tried something different. It replaced Maggie Seaver. While Joanna Kearns took time off during the final season, the show brought in a temporary maternal figure to fill her shoes. It was an experiment, one that barely had time to land before it was over. This new mom was supposed to offer structure, humor, and warmth. But instead of finding her place in the Seaver family, she quietly disappeared, and almost no one noticed. She came in with good intentions, but never got the chance to form real bonds on screen. Her character was more of a placeholder than a person, and while the actors did their best, it always felt like she was just filling Maggie's chair. No one gave her a story, and so she never felt like she had a home. By the time viewers started to warm up to her, the show had already moved on. The temporary character was never fully integrated into the household. She showed up, said her lines, played the role, and then left with zero fanfare. No arc, no farewell, just gone. Viewers who had grown up with Maggie, who saw her as a model of sharp wit and steady guidance, were left confused. Who was this stand-in? Why was she here? And why did no one acknowledge her exit? The answer lies somewhere between ratings and narrative convenience. But the result felt cold. Because even though she was not Maggie, she still stepped into a mother's role. And her sudden disappearance said a lot about how easily those roles can be brushed aside. A mother figure without roots, removed without a word. If you remember Martin, then you remember Gina. Loud, beautiful, stylish, and not afraid to go toe-to-toe with Martin himself. She was his partner, his equal, and one of the most iconic characters in 1990s television. But there is another Gina who disappeared long before the final credits rolled. Gina's best friend, Gina's sidekick, Gina's plus one. Her name was Pam's, and she stuck around. But where did the other women in Gina's circle go? More specifically, where did her early friend group vanish to? In the early seasons, Gina Waters was never just Martin's love interest. She was surrounded by friends, co-workers, a whole little world of her own. They hung out, dished gossip, and gave her someone to be around when Martin was busy yelling into his radio mic. But as the show went on, the background characters that helped build Gina's personal world faded out, and no one ever said why. Some simply stopped showing up. Others were written off with one-liners that barely stuck. But the biggest void was when Gina herself started pulling back. As many fans know, things got complicated behind the scenes. Tisha Campbell, who played Gina, left the show temporarily during the final season due to allegations against co-star Martin Lawrence. When she returned for the series finale, they did not share scenes, and the chemistry that had once defined the show felt fractured, distant, incomplete. But even before the legal tension spilled out, Gina's role had begun shrinking. The fire, the spark, still there. But the show had started reshaping itself around Martin's characters and comedy skits. Gina became less of a co-lead and more of a supporting player. And by the end, she was almost a memory of herself, quietly present, but no longer at the center. The emotional weight of her character's fading role was felt by anyone who had followed their love story from day one. Viewers were not just watching a couple drift, it felt like a whole piece of the show's soul was missing. And that hurts, especially when you remember how much she grounded the show in something real. Gina Waters may not have vanished in one episode, but the way she was pulled from the spotlight, slowly, silently, and without closure, left just as much of a mark. It was bold, too bold maybe. Hot L Baltimore came from Norman Lear, the mastermind behind groundbreaking hits like All in the Family and Maude. Based on a stage play by Lanford Wilson, the show was set in a rundown hotel filled with outcasts, dreamers, and people society had quietly ignored. Prostitutes, illegal immigrants, transients, they all called the hotel home. And that was exactly the problem. In a time when primetime television was still finding its nerve, Hot L Baltimore pushed the line so far forward that many stations refused to air it at all. The show tackled sex, poverty, racism, and identity, topics that were still taboo even by Lear's fearless standards. There was no laugh track to soften the edges, just conversations that felt uncomfortably real. Critics were split. Some praised it as raw and unflinching. Others found it too confrontational. And while Lear had managed to make controversy work in the past, this time the balance tipped. Viewers were unsure whether they were supposed to laugh, cry, or change the channel. Ratings were modest. Affiliate pushback was fierce. After just 13 episodes, ABC pulled the plug. Hot L Baltimore was gone. But it left a mark. It showed just how hard television had to fight to reflect real life, and how easy it was for something honest to be labeled too dangerous. Today, the show is rarely mentioned, but it remains a reminder that bravery on screen often pays the price first. There was something sacred about 227, like a front porch conversation on a warm night that you did not want to end. It was not flashy. It did not need a catchphrase or an outrageous setting to keep your attention. It just gave you people, real people, laughing, arguing, leaning on each other through life's ordinary storms. Centered around Mary Jenkins and her neighbors in a Washington, D.C. apartment building, 227 gave African-American family life the center stage it had long been denied. And it did it with humor, grace, and strength. Mary was sharp and fiercely loyal, with a side eye that could shut down a room. Sandra Clark, her glamorous, sassy neighbor, lit up the screen in high heels and higher drama. But what made 227 matter was not just the characters, it was the culture it celebrated. Sunday dinners, hallway gossip, community struggles. It showed Black joy and Black resilience in a way that felt honest and rare. For many families, this was the first time they saw themselves on screen not as sidekicks or stereotypes, but as the stars. And yet, 227 quietly vanished. It ended not in scandal or protest, but in silence. The world moved on, and network television forgot the space it had once carved out. The stories stopped airing, but they never stopped mattering. Today, it is a name that gets a smile from those who remember, and a blank stare from those who do not. But for anyone who grew up with it, 227 was not just a sitcom. It was home. This one did not need a script. An American Family was the first of its kind, a raw, unscripted look into the real life of a real family, the Louds. And America was not ready. When it aired in 1973, it shattered every idea we had about what family television meant. This was not fiction. This was not safe. The Loud family fought, cried, broke down on camera. We watched a marriage fall apart. We saw a son come out as gay on national television at a time when even saying the word was taboo. Viewers were shocked, some were angry, others felt seen for the first time. The Louds were not perfect, and that was the point. This was a mirror held up to the nation, and not everyone liked what they saw. The show only aired once, in a 13-part documentary format, but its ripples never stopped. It inspired decades of reality television, but none captured the raw honesty of this one. An American family vanished not because it failed, but because it told the truth. A truth that television, and maybe the country itself, was not yet ready to hear. Watching it now is like opening an old wound. You see how far we have come, but also how far we have not. The Louds were just a family, but they were also a revolution. Baywatch Nights was a spin-off that should have never worked, and in the end, it didn't. Airing from 1995 to 1997, it began as a detective drama starring David Hasselhoff's character from Baywatch, now moonlighting as a private investigator. But somewhere along the way, someone had a wild idea. What if it was supernatural? By its second season, the show had shifted into full X-Files territory, with Hasselhoff chasing ghosts, sea monsters, and other unexplainable threats under the moonlight. The tone was bizarre, the writing even more so. And while Baywatch thrived on sun and surf, Baywatch Nights traded it for fog machines and fear. Audiences were baffled. There were alien conspiracies, demon possessions, and episodes that felt like fever dreams. It was less a spin-off and more a genre-bending experiment in identity crisis. But hidden inside that chaos was a wild kind of courage, to throw everything safe away and start again. The camp factor went through the roof, but without the self-awareness to pull it off. Still, it tried. It tried to be different, to evolve, to turn a sun-soaked brand into something shadowy and strange. But that leap was too big. Ratings plummeted, and by 1997, it was quietly canceled, swallowed by the very darkness it tried to explore. Today, it exists more as trivia than memory, a weird side note in the legacy of one of the most watched shows in television history. But there's something oddly admirable about it. It dared to transform, to chase the unknown. And even if it stumbled, it did so with conviction. This show was weird, beautifully, unapologetically weird. The Adventures of Pete and Pete followed two red-headed brothers, both named Pete, through a suburban world that never quite behaved like it was supposed to. Their town had superheroes, personal nemeses, dancing tattooed moms, and ice cream men who waged psychological warfare. It was childhood stretched into surrealism. Every story felt like it came from a dream you almost forgot, but remembered just enough to know it meant something. There were bike rides that felt like quests, songs that seemed to change time, and friendships that dug deep into the soul. Little Pete was defiant and wild, a spark of rebellion. Big Pete was thoughtful and unsure, trying to figure out who he was becoming. Together, they made sense of a world that never did. The show never explained itself. That was its brilliance. It did not try to teach you a lesson, it just let you feel. Joy, confusion, sorrow, wonder. It trusted that you could handle that. And somehow, you always could. Pete and Pete vanished not because it failed, but because it did not fit the mold. Too poetic to be a kid's show, too silly to be called art. So it slipped between the cracks, like many beautiful things do. But if you ever saw an episode, really saw it, then you know it still lives somewhere deep inside your memory, right next to that weird summer day that felt like it meant more than it should have. It is rare for a television show to fail so quickly that it vanishes before audiences even have a chance to judge it. But the Tammy Grimes show did just that. Premiering in the fall of 1966, it was meant to be a showcase for Broadway star Tammy Grimes. The premise was simple. She played a wealthy, impulsive heiress who constantly meddled in other people's lives, creating chaos with her charm and good intentions. But from the moment it aired, something felt off. The timing was wrong. The character too quirky. The writing not nearly strong enough to carry the weight of its star. Critics called it grating. Audiences were baffled. Within just 4 episodes, ABC canceled it, making it one of the shortest-lived network television shows of all time. So why is it remembered among 1970s flops? Because its failure echoed throughout the next decade as a warning. Networks became more cautious about building shows around untested stars. And even reruns rarely gave the Tammy Grimes show a second life. It was buried so fast it almost became a myth, a phantom series whispered about by television historians. 4 episodes. That was all it took, and that was all it got. Denise Huxtable was never one to follow the rules. That was her charm. Played by Lisa Bonet, she was bold, stylish, unpredictable, and way ahead of her time. She made The Cosby Show sparkle in its early seasons, and when she got her own spin-off, A Different World, it felt like a natural evolution. We were going to follow Denise into college, watch her grow, and maybe even find herself. But what we got instead was a vanishing act that still feels strange decades later. Denise started college at Hillman in Season 1 of A Different World, and she brought all her messy brilliance with her. But behind the scenes, things were rocky. Creative differences, production shifts, and after just 1 season, she was gone. No epic departure, no long goodbye. Just a quick line in Season 2 that said she left school, and that was that, from star to ghost in less than a year. Then came her unexpected return to The Cosby Show. No college degree, no Hillman stories, just back at home, now married, with a stepdaughter in tow. The transition was abrupt, and the show never really filled in the blanks. What happened at Hillman? Why did she leave? How did she meet her husband? Viewers were left to connect the dots themselves, and most of them never connected at all. The way Denise drifted in and out of the narrative was unusual even by sitcom standards. She was a fan favorite, a cultural icon. But the shows that featured her seemed unsure how to write her. One moment she was front and center, the next she was fading into the background or gone entirely. And each time the audience felt the absence, because Denise was more than just a Huxtable. She was a vision of freedom, of nonconformity, of what it meant to figure things out your own way. Her character deserved more time, more clarity, more care. Instead, she was passed between shows like a plot device, and then, eventually, written out altogether. No final arc, no real goodbye, just a flicker of brilliance. And then silence. For anyone who grew up watching her, the question still lingers. What happened to Denise? Some shows are just too weird and wonderful to survive. The Adventures of Brisco County Jr. was one of them. Imagine a show that mixed cowboy shootouts with futuristic science fiction, where a Harvard-educated bounty hunter rode horseback through the Wild West chasing outlaws and ancient alien technology. It should not have worked, but somehow it did. Bruce Campbell's Brisco was charming, sharp, and oddly philosophical for a man in spurs. The tone was part Western, part comic book, and part pulp serial, and all heart. It winked at the camera, but never lost its soul. There were glowing orbs, steampunk gadgets, and a subplot about time-traveling artifacts that felt wildly out of place, and yet completely right. It was not just about justice. It was about belief. Belief in progress, in legacy, in the idea that even the Wild West had a future worth dreaming of. But television did not know what to do with it. The ratings were decent, the fan base was devoted, but it was too different, too out there. After 1 season, it was gone. One of the most original shows of the 1990s disappeared into the void while the world chose safer stories. Now, it lives on in whispers, on fan forums, in dusty DVD collections, in the memories of those who knew television had stumbled upon something special and let it slip away. Brisco County was ahead of its time. Maybe that was the problem. Or maybe the real adventure was just getting to see it at all. The Many Loves of Dobby Gillis was not your average teenage sitcom. It aired from 1959 to 1963 and had one of the most unique voices of its time. This was a show about a lovesick young man who talked directly to the camera, breaking the fourth wall long before it became a storytelling trend. Dobby was charming, hopelessly romantic, and always entangled in some absurd scheme to win over the girl of the week. But what made the show stand out even more was the presence of Maynard G. Krebs, played by Bob Denver, a beatnik sidekick who recoiled at the word work and became a cultural icon in his own right. The show was funny, sharp, and smarter than it often got credit for. It touched on real themes of class, ambition, and teenage rebellion, all wrapped in a light-hearted, lovable package. Dobby wasn't a rebel or a genius. He was something rarer, a sincere dreamer. He wanted love, he wanted meaning, and he wanted it without irony. It was the first time television said it was okay to be awkward, poetic, and hopeful at once. And it let teenagers be foolish without making them the punchline. It gave American youth a voice, an oddball voice maybe, but a voice nonetheless. Over time, though, it was overtaken by louder, brighter comedies and the rise of more dramatic fare. Dobby faded into the background, his monologues forgotten, his daydreams replaced by different kinds of heroes. But if you watched it, really watched it, you remember the warmth, the honesty, the way it made being young feel both ridiculous and profound. You could always hear Sylvia before you saw her. Fran's mother on The Nanny was loud, overbearing, dramatic, and perfect. She made entrance after entrance with huge hair, louder outfits, and a bag full of unsolicited advice, and she always had a snack in her purse. Sylvia Fine was as much a part of the show's DNA as Fran's voice or Maxwell's eyebrows, but near the end, Sylvia's appearances thinned out, then stopped entirely. In the early seasons, Sylvia was a staple. She showed up at the Sheffield mansion like she owned the place. She played matchmaker. She scolded Fran. She hovered like only a sitcom mother can. But she also made things feel real. She was a connection to Fran's roots, a reminder that behind the glitz of upper-class life was a close-knit, loud, Queens-based family that could not be ignored. Sylvia brought depth. She brought grounding. And, let's be honest, she brought a lot of lasagna. So what happened? By the time the final season rolled around, Sylvia had quietly faded. No big send-off, no tearful goodbye. Just fewer and fewer appearances until she was gone. For longtime fans, it was jarring. This was not just a side character. She was the mother. She had built-in chemistry with everyone. She filled every scene she was in. And then suddenly, nothing. Part of it was real-life scheduling. Actress Renee Taylor had other commitments. But on the show itself, no explanation was given. Fran was still planning weddings and raising kids, but Sylvia was nowhere to be seen. Not even at major life moments where her presence would have made sense. It felt off, unfinished. The worst part? Her disappearance left Fran without her mirror. Sylvia was more than comic relief. She was Fran's echo. The two of them bounced off each other fast and loud, like a vaudeville act wrapped in hairspray and love. Without Sylvia, Fran's world felt a little too polished, a little too far from Flushing. Fans still ask about it. Where did Sylvia go? And not because they want a spin-off, but because they felt her absence. The same way you notice when someone's seat is suddenly empty at the table. Sylvia Fine came in strong. She made us laugh. She made us wince. She reminded us of our own mothers. And when she left, we felt it. There was something disarmingly genuine about brotherly love. Maybe it was because the three brothers on screen, Joey, Matthew, and Andrew Lawrence, were real brothers in real life. Or maybe it was because the show never tried too hard. It just let the relationships speak for themselves. Set in Philadelphia, the series followed Joe Roman, a motorcycle-riding older brother who returns home after their father's death to help raise his two younger half-brothers and manage the family business. It was not flashy. It was not trying to reinvent the sitcom. It was just about a broken family trying to make things work. And somehow, that made it feel like everything. Joe was rough around the edges but protective. Matt was the overachiever with a heart too big for his age. Andy was the comic relief and the emotional glue. Together, they rebuilt more than just a business. They rebuilt trust. They rebuilt a family. Brotherly love hit differently because it did not pretend everything was fine. It showed grief without drowning in it, laughter without ignoring the pain, and it gave kids and parents alike a rare glimpse into what it means to show up for people, even when it is messy, especially when it is messy. The show was short-lived, barely 2 seasons, but it carved out a quiet place in the hearts of anyone who ever lost something and had to figure out how to move forward, one day at a time. not all love looks perfect. Sometimes it just looks like three brothers under one roof, doing the best they can. There are flops, and then there are disasters so extravagant that they seem to take a whole network down with them. Supertrain was NBC's attempt to build a blockbuster series around the concept of a futuristic, nuclear-powered luxury train. Think The Love Boat, but with wheels and none of the charm. It had all the ingredients of a hit, a massive budget, a unique setting, and plenty of hype. But something was off from the very beginning. The stories were thin, the characters forgettable, and the tone so inconsistent it gave viewers whiplash. Each episode felt like it was searching for its identity, wavering between drama, mystery, and comedy, but mastering none. The train itself, a giant, expensive model, was more impressive than anything the writers came up with. Behind the scenes, the budget spiraled out of control. It became the most expensive television series ever made at the time, but no amount of money could fix the fact that nobody cared about the people on board. The ratings crashed almost immediately. Critics savaged it. The audience, confused and underwhelmed, simply walked away. NBC tried to retool it. New characters, a shift in tone, but it was too late. Supertrain lasted only 9 episodes before it was quietly canceled. Today, it lives on as one of the most iconic failures in television history. A lavish machine with nowhere to go and no one left to watch it roll by. A beautiful wreck on the tracks of what might have been. In the very first episode of Friends, we met Carol Willick. She was Ross's ex-wife, the mother of his child, and the start of one of the show's earliest plot lines. Her coming out, her new relationship with Susan, and the arrival of baby Ben, it all set the tone for Ross's character and gave the show some of its earliest depth. Carol was funny, sharp, and kind, even if she and Ross were always a little awkward around each other. But somewhere between those early seasons and the long stretch that followed, she faded. Slowly, quietly, until one day, Carol Willick was just gone. She did not get a send-off. There was no emotional goodbye. No final co-parenting scene or acknowledgement that she had once been a major part of the story. One season, she was helping Ross navigate parenthood. The next, she was background noise. After that, not even that. Ben would show up occasionally, but Carol? It was like she stopped existing in the Friends universe. What makes this disappearance even more bizarre is how pivotal she once was. Her relationship with Susan was groundbreaking for network television in the 1990s. It was not always handled perfectly, but it was visible, honest, and important. Carol and Susan co-parented with Ross. They attended school events, they had dinner scenes, and then suddenly, they did not. The truth is, Friends slowly turned away from the outside world. It narrowed its focus to the core 6. Anyone not in that inner circle, Carol, Ben, Susan, got less and less screen time. And eventually, none at all. It was a creative decision. But to longtime viewers, it felt like watching a family photo get cropped tighter and tighter until half the people were gone. Carol's disappearance hits especially hard because she was never just a one-note side character. She had agency, a life, a home, and she was part of a story that mattered. Her vanishing left a strange emptiness behind, especially for people who tuned in every week, waiting to see how Ross would grow as a dad. He did not, at least not on screen. Carol Willick helped start the Friends story, but the story moved on without her, and in doing so, left a piece of itself behind. This show did not just imagine superpowers, it made you feel like they might happen to you next. The secret world of Alex Mack was every middle schooler's fantasy wrapped in a denim jacket and a bucket hat. When a normal girl named Alex is accidentally doused in a mysterious chemical, she gains powers. She can move things with her mind, shoot electricity from her fingers, and even melt into a puddle. But this was not some glossy superhero tale. Alex did not become famous or powerful. She became hunted, and afraid, and different. The show was about more than abilities. It was about the isolation of adolescence, about hiding who you are because the world is not ready, about balancing science homework with secret identities, friendship with fear. Alex was smart, brave, vulnerable, and deeply human. Her world was not filled with capes and explosions, but with skateboards, lockers, and the quiet terror of being discovered. There were corporations chasing her, best friends protecting her, and parents who had no idea what she was going through. That made it real. That made it hurt. The show resonated because it never glamorized its concept. It treated being special as a burden. And for kids feeling weird or out of place, that message was everything. When it ended after 4 seasons, it left behind more than a cliffhanger. It left behind a community of viewers who still wonder what happened to Alex and whether there is still magic hiding just beneath the surface of a normal life. If one of these moms stuck with you, share your thoughts below, like the video, and subscribe for more forgotten stories.